Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the Palestine situation at this time in terms of the rebuilding, in terms of counter proposals to Trump's plans that have come, for example, from the Arabs, the European support overall, and of course the US-Israel reactions, overall the ramifications of how this rebuilding will happen in the wake of such a huge displacement, in the wake of such huge ramifications that we've seen from the war overall. We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about the importance of Palestinians' self-determination, which is what they had been always agitating for. Whether comprehensive reconstruction, accountability will happen, can happen at all. All of those things today on Perspective. I have with me Jauhar Saleem, who's a former Foreign Secretary and President IRS. Thank you for being with us today. We also have Wajih Abbasi, who is an IR expert. Thank you for joining us today. Jauhar Sahab, how do you look at first this Arab counter proposal to what is Trump's plan as far as Gaza in terms of and Palestine overall, the situation there is concerned?
I think it's a good plan. It was basically prepared by the Egyptians.
Okay.
It's a 112-page document, very detailed. Then subsequently it was adopted by the Arab League. Egypt announced it in a summit. And then Arab League adopted it. Subsequently, OIC has adopted it. Then Hamas has also said that they will support it. Then the European countries, leading European powers, that includes UK, France, Germany, Italy, they have said that they support the plan. But unfortunately, the Americans, they have rejected the plan. The spokeswoman Tammy, the State Department spokesperson, said America rejects the plan and they do not agree with the basic contours. But then Steve Witkoff, who's the special representative of President Trump for the Middle East, he came up with a more guarded and sort of like a slight walk back, I would say. He said that it's a good faith's first step. But the Israelis have totally rejected the plan. They said that we have to move out of these sort of like traditional thing, and what they have termed as a traditional thinking, and they said that we have to look at the future, but they didn't really elaborate what they mean by that. Now let's look at the plan itself. What does the plan say? It's a three-stage plan. The first, the 6 months would be the interim stage, during which they want to set up an administration, a technocrat administration, comprising Palestinians, which would be overlooked or overseen by the Palestinian Authority.
Okay.
And then they want to have peacekeepers from the United Nations, UNSC peacekeepers there, and sort of the countries like the neighboring countries pitching in as well. In the second stage, so in the first stage, because like Gaza right now, it's a heap of rubble, literally, with no utility services working, and the type of aid which is required. It's really needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. So what they're saying is, in the stage 2 then, 200,000 houses, temporary housing, to be built in stage 2, so that all the Palestinians which are displaced presently, and 80% of the housing and the buildings, everything is destroyed. So at least they have some decent sort of basic amenities. The utilities would be restored. They plan to set up a harbor as well, an airport, some industrial centers, and also some hotels, But that would come more into the phase 3, where they plan to have another 400,000 houses, like then getting everything back to normal, in terms of all the amenities, and developing Gaza as a thriving economy. The total cost that they envisage is $53 billion.
Okay.
$3 billion is to be spent in the first 6 months, $20 billion in the second phase, and $30 billion in the third phase. Now, what is the criticism on this plan? The criticism is that the plan is, and this is a good plan. I said a very detailed plan, 112 pages, and covering all the essentials. But what it doesn't cover from an Israeli perspective or from an American perspective is what happens to Hamas. Will Hamas be disarmed? Now this is the question this is the biggest question that the Israelis raise. that because they said we are not going to accept anything which would not call for complete disarmament of Hamas. So far as the plan is concerned, it doesn't really talk about that in great detail, but it talks about some, some partial steps in that direction.
Let me also
please.
include Wajih Sahib, and then I'll come back to you. Wajih Sahib, as far as this current geopolitical situation is concerned, you heard what Jauhar Sahib is saying. What are the chances of, we talk about the two-state solution. What are the chances of that ever being implemented? We know where the US is.
Yes. Frankly speaking, the October 7 action by the Hamas has in fact, in my view, put the two-state solution in the back burner.
Okay.
Because now the whole discussion has shifted from the two-state solution or the Palestine state towards Gaza and Hamas and that sort of reconstruction of Gaza and all that thing. And the Americans are, what the Trump plan was, to expel all the Palestinians from Gaza and rebuild that area. That's what he's saying. So the Americans have totally gone back because, the Oslo agreement was brokered by the United States itself, and the US was the grantor of that agreement. Now the US itself is saying that they are not supporting actually two-state solutions, and they are not opposing the Israeli build-ups in the West Bank also. So frankly, that two-state solution has gone backward. The October 7 action by Hamas has greatly damaged the Palestinian cause.
Okay.
The Muslim world probably is not saying that way because that note criticism is of Palestinians is generally considered good, but that has damaged the Palestinian cause. And now, as we have already said, that even this solution by the Arab League is not being supported by the United States. So the Europeans are supporting it, but the main factor will remain the United States and Israel, what they are doing. And for that purpose,
what does the US envisage at this time? Let me include Jauhar Sahib. Jauhar Sahib, what does the US envisage now for Palestine? What is Trump really saying?
First of all, I'd like to bring the opposing perspective on this. That is, okay, the 7th October, what happened then was those were terrorist attacks, and they would have set back the sort of, let's say the Palestinian cause, definitely. But what happened in the aftermath of that for the next 17 months, all the killings that we have seen, the destruction that we have seen, and the excesses that we have seen, and the violations, massive violations of human rights that we have seen, I think, and a lot of analysts have argued that, that has actually brought the Palestinian question back to the table. Because why? Because Palestinian state question, Oslo Accords were practically dead, then nothing was happening. America was not talking about that. In fact, Americans had been negotiating the Abraham Accords, in President Trump's last term. Biden was not, before the 7th October attacks, they were not even talking about anything about Palestine. But Trump, what was he doing? He was basically, in Abraham Accords, they were normalizing Israel's relations with Arab and other countries, African countries, one after another, without any regard to the Palestinian question. They had literally said, forget about the Palestinian statehood, forget about the Palestinian question. And the capital was also being shifted to, Jerusalem, and sort of, the Americans even decided to bring their embassy back. So people would argue that basically what has happened in the last 7 months have actually brought the question back. And in fact, if you recall, President Biden in his last months of the presidency came up what he called the Grand Reconciliation Plan. There was a plan whereby the Saudis and other Arab countries would normalize with Israel, but in lieu of a path to statehood. Now everybody's talking about the Palestinian, the state of Palestine, the self-determination. In fact, what we've seen in the last 17 months, so many more countries have recognized Palestine. And these are the European countries, which earlier had not, they had a very clear stance on that. So I think the question is back. But now, what has to happen is, of course, everybody is sort of, right now, all the plans and everything, they are talking about what immediately needs to happen in Gaza, because it needs to, like I said, right now Gaza is probably like, it's the type of place in the world that nobody would want to see, it's so much destruction and so much devastation there, and the inhuman conditions. So you have to, of course, build that. But the Palestinian question is back. It has to be addressed. The fact is there's still very diametrically opposite views in terms of what Israelis want. So far as the Americans, what do the Americans want? Like this, I had said in many of my previous commentaries, that if the Republicans come to power, particularly like, under President Trump, of course, then America's point of view would shift even closer towards Israel's point of view, because, in fact, there's a personal relationship between President Trump and Netanyahu as well, besides the sort of, the general Republican perspective, which is closer to Israel than the Democrat, although there's a bipartisan support in America for Israel, but that support is not for Netanyahu, unconditionally. But from a Republican Party's perspective, it's almost there, Right. So, but what I see now is, you see, if we have to, okay, Gaza, now there are all these plans on the table and everything, but they'll have to, because, like before this, there was a talk that the Saudis were probably like, getting very close to having a deal, some sort of a deal like the Abraham Accords. But now Saudis are very clear that unless the Palestinian question is addressed, they will not have normalization. The same has become the position of many other Arab countries as well. And they know that no other country would now move towards normalization. In fact, if you see the position of Europeans and the positions of many other countries in South America, even as so far as Brazil and Japan and all that, that has also become more sort of, pro-Palestinian now. And they're all now saying that, there has to be a two-state solution. Right. So this is something that we were not listening in the last many years, not hearing anymore. So I believe that the question of Palestinian self-determination has come back with a bang. Okay. And now when they try to resolve Gaza, they will also have to think about the larger question.
Wajih Sahab, of course, doesn't agree with that. He thinks
I had different perspective, and of course, in my perspective, of course, the October 7 attacks, as frankly, diplomatically, as Joseph is saying, that more countries have come forward with the support to Palestinians. But at the ground level, the Palestinians have suffered more. And Israeli stance on that issue has become more rigid as compared to before. Yes. And Israel has been given more chance to destroy the Palestinian resistance, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank also, in southern Lebanon, in other areas. So Israel has become more powerful as a result of that action.
But how does, how do you assess the response? We've talked about the Muslim, of course, we talked about Muslim majority countries like, of course, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. We've seen them rally behind Palestine in a manner like never before. Overall, do you think that solidarity is going to make any difference at all to whatever the Americans say, to whatever, Israel is of course saying?
One thing everybody should be very clear, and the Palestinians and the Muslim support should be very clear. That is the plan of President Trump to expel the Palestinians from Gaza and to develop it. Because we have seen right from 1948 that whenever the Palestinians left an area, they were never allowed to come back to that area. And they became refugees both inside the West Bank and Gaza and in other Arab countries also. And they were not allowed to come back to their areas. Even if some the Palestinians in Jordan or in Lebanon were refugees there, they're not being allowed to go back to West Bank or Gaza or the territories under the direct Israeli control also. So there should be, there should be total stance on that nobody from the Gaza will go out from that area. If they go out, they go to Israel, not to any Arab country, so that they are not stopped from coming back to that area. So that should be clear. if they have any reconstruction plan for the Gaza area, the people should be settled as this plan, this OIC plan envisages, that they should resettle them in the same area also. So, President Trump has different, is a different idea. So, he was saying that he will take over Greenland or that sea of New Mexico.
But are they practical?
It doesn't seem that practical, but you never know.
Right. Ambassador, there is, on the one hand, of course, we're talking about, what the Palestinians want. On the one hand, of course, how, whether self-determination, but the very other real aspect of all of this, this tragedy, travesty that we've seen is the humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
As far as this humanitarian crisis is concerned, as far as Pakistan is concerned, with our ability to address, this forced displacement of Palestinians, our ability to engage with other international organizations, how do you see this? Our diplomatic efforts at all with regard to this?
Pakistan had been at the forefront of the countries supporting Palestinian cause for a long time, and still is.
Yes.
I think the only difference that we see now, and let's be practical about it, the fact is that the Americans or others, they now, the key parties in it, the Israelis and the Palestinians perhaps, they realize that other than the Americans and Israelis, the important countries are the neighboring countries, the Jordanians, the Egyptians. And then Qataris played some role because Hamas's leadership was based there at some point. But other than that, the countries, big Islamic major Islamic countries such as Pakistan, what they can do is, first of all, within the United Nations, in that system, because Pakistan has a significant voice there in the UN, and it has been there since decades. There, Pakistan raises the UN, the Palestinian cause. And there we've done rather well. Even recently, I think the Palestinian ambassadors, they thanked the permanent representative Munir Akram there for so eloquently and articulating the Palestinian voice so well, the Palestinian issue so well. That is one. The other is the mechanism of Organization of Islamic Countries, OIC, of course, where Pakistan again is a leading country. Now, that organization, OIC, in fact, it was set up in response to the arson attack on Al-Quds in 1969. And it has one of its leading principles is to raise voice for this Palestinian cause. That is one of its basic tenets. And there Pakistan has always been playing a leading role. Now in general, OIC's role has diminished. In its relevance has diminished as well, because now the type of diplomacy which is being conducted, it's more like shuttle diplomacy, and Americans are just it's like pick and choose in terms of the countries that they want to work with. That is what we saw with the Biden administration, and that continues to be the case with the Trump administration as well. And also what they're doing is Trump has, he's appointed and special envoys for the Middle East, and some of them are actually related to him as well, as we know. Previously as well, we saw this penchant where he had basically given major leeway to his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who basically negotiated these Abraham Accords. So it's a different level, it's a different style of diplomacy that we see now. And I think in this style of diplomacy which is happening there, and in the current international political dispensation, particularly in that region, we don't really have a key role. We have to accept that. But having stated that, whatever we can do within the UN system, or the GA, whether it's GA or not, we have to remember Pakistan is now a member of the United Nations Security Council, a non-permanent member. So that provides us a forum whenever this matter comes to the UNSC, but it doesn't really come to the UNSC ambit all the time. But whenever it does, and it will at some point, that is where Pakistan will have an important role to play. But other than that, our role could be bilaterally, like for example with key countries such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and at the forum of the OIC.
Wajih Sahab, Ambassador has talked at some length about international relations, but how do you see overall, whatever our stance is, the stance of the Muslim community as a whole, countries like Saudi Arabia, how do they impact international relations and global powers like the US and EU even, and how countries who support Palestine then interact with them diplomatically also to further the Palestinian cause?
Yeah. Because of these Abraham Accords and even before that, when some of the Muslim countries recognized Israel, that sort of in one way or the other damaged the Palestinian cause, because we had a the Muslim world had a very clear stance since 1948, or especially after the 1979, when when Palestinians accepted the two-state solution. This stance was that the Israelis accept the Palestinians, they leave the West Bank, Gaza and the East Jerusalem, and then the Muslim world can have relations with Israel. Now, without the establishment of that area, the independence of Palestinian state, when the Muslim countries recognize Israel, that damages the Palestinian cause. So, in the future, now what has happened, but in the future, that the policy should be that if these Muslim countries want to help them, that policy should be that very coherent policy that no other Muslim country will go for recognition or having diplomatic relations with Israel without Israel having to concede rights of the Palestinians according to Oslo Agreement or something like that. Without that, and that they can push the other countries, especially the Palestinian cause has got much better support in Latin America lately, and some European countries are also been quite more. They have softened stance on the Palestinian issue. So they should use their collective strength to get more support for the Palestinian cause internationally. So that in that way, sometime in future they might be able to get some rights. But as Ambassador Saab would say, that the support for the Palestinians and the United Nations, they are the two-state solution and the independence of Palestinian state, has been quite strong. But it wasn't that strong among the powerful countries like the United States and the Western Europe.
What about Egypt and the way that Egypt has rallied behind the Palestinian cause? Do you think that it's making some headway, it's making a difference, the way that it's standing behind Palestine?
On the Gaza issue, Egyptian stance will be very crucial. Because if they expel the Gazans from their area, then that obvious destination would be the Sinai, the Egyptian area. So Egypt has to be very strong. They will have to be very strong to resist such moves. So
they wanted, of course, they want wider international support. But do you think that they have a chance of getting it?
Yeah, that's what, because beyond the United States and Israel, the Israeli plan has not much support.
Okay.
So if the Muslim nations stand beyond the Egyptian position, then that Egyptian position will get stronger, and especially in the United Nations, any plan like that will not get support. So without that support, that will not be will not have that sanctity, international sanctity.
Fair enough. Jauhar Sahib, the OIC is working to get support, global backing from, for example, from international powers like the EU, Japan, Russia and China. How far, what are the chances of them being able to succeed in that regard? And to what extent, really, as far as reconstruction again is concerned?
Yeah, first of all, during these 17 months, particularly after the first few months when it was apparent, what the Israelis were doing there, we saw condemnation of sort of, or similar reactions from literally all parts of the world. Even countries sort of, like I said, in South America to not just Middle East, Asia, but East Asia, everywhere, Central Asia, of course, in their Muslim countries. Russia and China, all the important powers, other than the US, because US, of course, is a steadfast supporter of Israel. But we saw that there was certain times when even the US allowed certain resolutions to be passed in the UNSC against Israel, which was unprecedented as well.
Right.
And we know that privately Biden was not very happy with Netanyahu and criticized him privately, which was leaked to the media. Now, in terms of, so that support, what I mean to say is it's still there. I mean, it was there, it's there now. The world wants to see that sort of conflict ending. The world wants to see that ceasefire becoming permanent. The world wants to see Gaza being reconstructed. And then there are no two opinions about that. Now, the only thing is the mechanism of it. Now, so far as the mechanism is concerned, first President Trump floated an idea, the idea of a Riviera of the Middle East, whereby he wanted all the sort of, Palestinian population to be, literally displaced from there, relocated elsewhere. Like, that was rejected by everybody, other than the Israelis, who are still supporting that idea. But that idea does not have any traction anywhere in the world. Now, this Egyptian plan has been supported, as I've mentioned, not just by the region, by the Muslim countries, by the leading European powers as well. And Egyptian, Foreign Minister has said, the Foreign Minister Badr has said that he would really want the Russians and Chinese to also support the plan, which they probably would. I don't think they would have anything against this plan. Now, so far as the question of the money is concerned, the $53 billion, who would pitch in? So the Saudis and others, the UAE and the sort of, the rich Arab countries and the European countries and others, what they say is that once the plan is approved by everyone, then they would be willing to pitch in. And also then they plan to have donors conferences, like particularly one could be hosted by for instance, and it has happened in the past, it's a usual practice in diplomacy. You could have it in the UN or other sort of, forums as well. I think money may not be a big problem. The problem is to have an agreed plan, because once that is there, the money would start pouring in, because, why? Because there's so much sympathy in the world right now. There was so much solidarity in terms of the suffering of the Palestinians. And everybody knows that this conflict, if it widens, it can threaten not just the peace in that region, but in the whole world. Because, so the feelings of, all the Muslims in the world, all the sort of, Jewish people in the world, or the Christian people, everybody sort of, has sentimental attachment to sort of, to that question. So that is, I think what the important thing is now, that, the Americans and the Israelis and the sort of, the Egyptians and the other parties which have been sort of, negotiating so far, and they came up with and I have to say that there, I think that's an important point. This day after plan had to come into play, because the plan, the ceasefire plan that the Americans negotiated with the sort of, between the Israelis and Hamas, that three-phase plan, and I had said it in many of my previous commentaries, that after the first phase, the plan would have a deadlock, and that is exactly what has happened. If that plan did not have a deadlock, then there would not be a need for another plan, perhaps, because then they could have, because you see, after the, after the 16th of the first phase, the 16th day of the first phase, they were supposed to negotiate, the second phase of the plan and how to make the ceasefire permanent. Once you had some sort of, agreement on that, then the other part about reconstruction could have been sorted. That was not a big, the whole part of it is, the whole question is how to make this ceasefire permanent. That is the $64,000 question, so to speak. So, but this plan is an alternate to that in a way, basically, or at least it fill in the gaps, and that is why this plan has so much traction now. But I believe that the whole point is about having an agreement, sort of, the Americans and Israelis and the sort of, the Palestinians, and the key countries around it. Once there's an agreement, the question of money would not be that important.
Right. Wajih Saab, in terms of, other, for example, European if we look at the difference between what Trump's plan is and what Arab plan for Gaza is, displacement really is a huge issue, right? Because as far as the Arab plan is concerned, it talks about it proposes to build Gaza without displacing 2.4 million residents, whereas Trump's plan angles towards the Israeli cause. And like Jauhar Saab also said, it seems that the overall solution is more suited to Israel than it is to, it seems to favor Israel. And that impression itself, do you think that the US is okay with it?
Probably as Jauhar Saab has already said, the sticking point will be Hamas.
Okay.
Because Israel, since the start of this war on October 7, Israeli policy has been clear that it doesn't want Hamas anymore in the Gazan area. So what will happen to Hamas? Will Hamas allow itself to be disbanded? Because as the ceasefire started after this last agreement between Israel and Hamas, we had seen that Hamas militants on the streets, they were, they took control of the areas again. So they are still there. So their presence will be the issue, and Israel and Americans will probably would like Hamas to be replaced with some other authority. That authority, unfortunately, after the emergence of Hamas, the PLO's position in Gaza are totally obliterated. They don't have the West Bank government doesn't have control over Gaza, and it can't. Will it be able to re-establish its role in Gaza? Or will Israel allow it to re-establish its role in Gaza? That would be question. So if Hamas allows itself to be disbanded, then there might be some sort of agreement on that. Otherwise, that will be it will be difficult.
But Ambassador, what are the chances of Hamas being disbanded, like Wajih Saab is saying, overall in terms of the situation now and how we look at things now for Hamas?
Yes, elephant in the room is like what happens to Hamas. I have said in my previous commentaries that it's very difficult to see a situation where Israel and Hamas can now have a peaceful coexistence of any sort. So given that, right now the bone of contention is, will Hamas disarm? Because the Egyptian or the Arab plan, which because it has been adopted by the Arab countries now, and actually you could even call it the Muslim countries plan because it has been adopted by OIC as well. That doesn't really talk about a full disarmament.
Okay.
Israelis and Americans wanted full disarmament. Now the point is, what does Hamas say? Now what Hamas has said so far is that, okay, we can be detached from the administration. So to that point they agree that we will be detached, in terms of the administration of sort of, Gaza the day after, sort of, in the day after scenario. But they have not shown any inclination for disarmament, So that is a big sticking point.
Okay.
And then again, we have to remember that there's a lot of domestic politics involved in this as well. Israel's domestic politics, that is. Netanyahu can only survive so far as the conflict continues.
Okay.
If this conflict, I'm talking about this present conflict, not the whole Palestinian question, of course. Now, if this conflict sort of ends in some ways, there's a permanent ceasefire, then there have to be elections in Israel, then they have to get back to normalcy, and then all the cases against him in the Israeli Supreme Court, and those are very potent cases, and they're very serious cases. So he doesn't want to see that.
Okay.
And that is why it seems to be his utmost endeavor to
hold on to this.
Yeah, exactly, not to have a permanent ceasefire. And then that is why exactly he has been saying, okay, we can extend the phase one, this phase of the agreement that they had, the temporary ceasefire agreement that they had, the phase one, which because the 42 days are over now. He said we could have another 50 days. The Americans have supported him, by the way. And during that, they said, okay, we can have some more sort of hostages back, and sort of, why does he want the continuity of that? Because he knows that if it extended, and they will have more hostages back or their bodies back, because out of the 59 left, as per the Israelis, most are dead apparently, at least a majority of them. So then the bargaining chip left with Hamas would be sort of less and less, less and less effective at least. So that is the big question now, like number one, like what happens to Hamas? And number two,
and
what about
Netanyahu's
political survival?
Where is Trump?
No, Trump, as I've said, because Trump, first of all, the Republican Party is closer to the perspective of, like the ruling Israeli, let's say the Israeli government, I'm not saying Israel, Israeli government, than the Democrat perspective. That's one thing. The second thing, like I said, was that Trump enjoys personal relationship with Netanyahu. And because of that,
but because of that, he said that, when I come, there will be ceasefire. When I come, there will be a solution. But the question is, and I think people were saying that from the very beginning, that the solution is going to be on Israel's terms.
Exactly. I've said that,
yes,
in my previous commentaries.
This is what we are seeing.
And also, you see, Trump made a lot of declarations. He said that on the first day of my administration, I would end the Ukraine conflict. Has it ended? No. He also made a lot of declarations in terms of the domestic, like politics in America, which have not come true so far. Now, this ceasefire, we have to remember this temporary ceasefire which has happened. This was being negotiated by Biden since May, last year. And the only reason in the last few months it was delayed, in fact, there's a sort of, many analysts believe that it was being delayed by Netanyahu to help Trump in the elections, and that is why it was announced just a day before he would sort of, like.
And the timing of, like you said, of course,
Exactly.
the timing of it, and it allowed Trump to sort of,
to claim,
success from it as much as possible. So there is that. But Isa, the situation there now at this time for the people. Let's, we have little time. I want to talk. What do you think what is happening there on ground right now for the people, and what kind of a timeline, realistically speaking, are they looking at now for there to be that kind of rebuilding, for there to be that kind of, for things to come back to some semblance of normalcy, let's say, for the people of Gaza, for the people of Palestine?
As far as, this ground situation is concerned, I think this is worse than what Japan or Germany had after the Second World War. Because everything, as we see in the pictures, everything is destroyed. There is no living space left. There are no schools, no water, no supplies, nothing. People have nothing to build their lives on. Even if there is no bombing now, but they have nothing to live on. They have no houses, no water supplies, no healthcare system. I mean, nothing is on the ground. So that is the worst kind of situation the humanity has ever faced in recent history, recent centuries, in fact. So we can't imagine, while sitting here, we can't imagine their situation, their destruction and their situation and their families. And every family must have had their bird earners destroyed, and there is no economic activity. So that people can't earn anything, and they can't spend anything. There are no supplies, and they can't. There are no markets. So whatever normal life we envisage in these times is not there. So we can't. It's a very difficult situation for the people there, and that makes it very emergent. That makes it very emergent.
Whatever
for the
plan,
world.
whatever solution, the world powers, or it comes down to you saying that there's no realistic timeline for when this kind of rebuilding on that massive scale can take place.
It's very difficult to say that, but it has to start. Not tomorrow, today. If we want to, if the world wants to help the Palestinians, help the people of Gaza, they should start any rebuilding activity as early as possible. and these things have to be settled down. But the question again, as Ambassador Saab has said, that it's always politics, and they say that politics is always local politics. So the local politics is that the Netanyahu
and self-interest of Netanyahu,
and then there is another issue in the Israeli the whole state system. In Israelis, you know that proportional representation system which Israel has, this smaller, the more extremist parties have the balance. And without the support of these extremist parties, right, the extreme right parties, no government in Israel is formed. And mostly the governments, the prime ministers, have to follow the policies of those extremist elements. In our system, like first past the post system which we have, these people are just pushed at the out of the system mostly. But in Israeli system, they can't have it at the center stage. So that is another issue which will make it difficult for the Israeli government probably to compromise.
Do you agree, Ambassador? Unfortunately, we're out of time, but you also agree that there is no timeline for the people of Israel while the world continues to play politics?
Yeah, it's true. There's no timeline. You know, these plans have timelines.
It could potentially take decades at this
But these, I mean, they have to agree on some plan, and that's where it will all commence. But what I can tell you is that because of the fact that, you know, this issue now has sort of, you know, like has been so much in the world media and in the conscience of the sort of, and in the international public opinion, the court of international public opinion, because of that, I think there's enormous pressure now. So that pressure was not there 2 years back, 5 years back, 10 years back. So probably there's a better possibility of something coming out of it than 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us. On that note, thank you for joining us. Wajih Abbasi Saab, thank you for being with us. Jauhar Saleem Saab, thank you for your time. Overall, of course, as the world watches, it is no doubt that, you know, while the self-interest of, for example, Netanyahu or, you know, whatever politics is happening behind the scenes, it is the people of Gaza, it is the people of Palestine that continue to wait for that rebuilding. And like it was said here today, the rebuilding must start not tomorrow but today for the people of Palestine. At the same time, on an optimistic note, perhaps, you know, there is the kind of pressure that we see at this time has never been there before. So perhaps there is hope that there will be rebuilding sooner rather than later. Let's hope that we can move soonest towards that for the people of Palestine. Thank you so much for joining us today on Press.